All right, let's talk Houston Texans here for a little bit. This is a team that's, like, ever since last season, the way it ended, they've turned around and made a lot of great moves. Great start to the offseason. Nailed it with the D'Amico Ryans hire. Did a great job filling out the coaching staff. Now their eyes are fully trained on the NFL draft, the number 2 overall pick they currently hold. And there's some big news on that front that's come out over the past few days. I think it's a great news for the Houston Texans. But before I get into that news, Texans fans, I want to hear from you guys in the comment section below. Look, this entire offseason, everyone knows that there's going to be a lot of bodies come into the Houston organization, and the Texans are going to get rid of a lot of people, right? A lot of players are going to be cut, traded, whatever, as we waived, whatever you want to say. They're going to no longer be part of the Houston Texans organization. Let me know in the comment section below, though, what's one guy in under-the-radar Houston Texans that you think the Texans should really hold on to and maybe not cut or not trade? Let me know who you think there's one player, one current Houston Texan that the Texans should not get rid of because you think he's going to be a real big-time impact player going forward, really help the rebuild here. And let me know who that guy is in the comment section below. All right, like I alluded to, so the Houston Texans, their eyes, along with the rest of the NFL's eyes as we get closer to the scouting combine, are fully honed in on the NFL draft. And for the Texans, with the number 2 overall pick, it's kind of it isn't, a unanimous decision at this point, but odds are heavily weighted that they're going to go quarterback. It makes sense they're going to go quarterback. They need a franchise quarterback. And the one concern with the Houston Texans was potentially they're focused on one specific guy, one guy who they thought would be the leader of the franchise going forward. But because they don't hold the number 1 overall draft pick, and the Bears, who have the number 1 overall pick, have been linked to a lot of rumors to potentially trading down. There's, of course, a lot of concern with the Texans that a team could potentially leapfrog Houston and get the apple of the Texans eye at the quarterback position. But there's huge news out recently involving none other than former Florida quarterback Anthony Richardson, who's been seen here, let me throw a picture of Richardson there, who's been seen by a lot of people as sort of a physical phenom, but did not produce very well in college. And there's a report out from Sports Illustrated, and here I'm going to read it for you here real quick. Florida's Anthony Richardson was projected to be the 4th quarterback off the board, but his odds of going higher have skyrocketed. Anthony Richardson's odds to become the first Florida player ever drafted number 1 overall are rapidly improving. The redshirt sophomore opened as a long shot to hear his name called first in April's NFL draft. However, Richardson's stock has skyrocketed in recent weeks after a few favorable mock drafts. He previously had odds as long as plus 10,000. Huge. But he can now be found among the favorites to go first with the odds as low as plus 750 at some sports books. In fact, I saw one report, I think, from Caesars Sportsbooks, and Caesars was interesting. They were the first sports book to track the odds of Trayvon Walker, who kind of came out of nowhere to go from, really long shot odds last year to be number 1 overall pick. And Caesars said, hey, this guy, they quickly changed their tune and gave him really good odds before anybody else did. And then he obviously went number 1 overall to a surprise of a lot of people, to the Jacksonville Jaguars last offseason. So a lot of these sports books, remember, that is smart money. That's big money, and guys like Caesar Sportsbooks are noticing a trend of Anthony Richardson potentially going number 1 overall, which means a team likely trading up, leapfrogging Houston to get Anthony Richardson. The Houston Texans could not ask for a better situation than somebody leapfrogging them and getting Anthony Richardson. I think that's the perfect, ideal scenario to have happen, because I think right now there are 2 options for the Houston Texans that they really need to be the franchise quarterback. It's either Bryce Young, who I'll get to in a little bit, or C.J. Stroud. Both these guys, I think, are kind of really good models for what the Texans want. I think they're the best 2 quarterback prospects in the draft. Some people like Will Levis because he has physical tools. Some people like Anthony Richardson for a lot of same things. I think that's a hit and miss. For every Josh Allen, there's a Paxton Lynch, right? So I just think that's a lot more risky. And the Houston Texans need a smart, stable, CEO, captain, guy who can manage the entire organization, true franchise quarterback, not just an athletic phenom. So the fact that Anthony Richardson's odds are skyrocketing, go number 1 overall, means that a lot of people are thinking Anthony Richardson, a lot of smart people, smart money. I always want to emphasize that when we're talking about the sports books in Vegas here. A lot of people think Anthony Richardson will go off the board first. Someone will leapfrog the Texans trade with the Bears to get Richardson, and that's perfect, because the one concern, like I alluded to earlier with the Houston Texans, is that someone would trade up to number 1 and get who I think is a perfect Texans fit, and that's Bryce Young. Let me throw a picture of Bryce Young there out of Alabama. There he goes against Texas. Bryce Young, to me, is the perfect fit for the Houston Texans, and here's why. So Bryce Young, although he played at Alabama, did not have a lot of talent, at least level of Alabama talent last season. Their wide receiving core was not very good. It was hurt. It was beat up. Their offensive line had issues. Their offensive coordinator was Bill O'Brien, a guy Houston Texans fans are very familiar with, and there's a lot of concerns that O'Brien did not do a good job in his tenure in Alabama with Bryce Young. Despite that, Bryce Young was phenomenal. His pocket presence to move around in the pocket, to make big plays, to keep him in games. I mean, they were this close. They lost 2 games on the final play of the game. Otherwise, they would be going to the SEC championship game. They probably would have made the college football playoff strictly on the back of Bryce Young. And that's exactly why he's the perfect fit for Houston. Because as they go through this rebuild, Houston's going to have a lot of pieces where they're not going to have the level of talent as other teams. They're not going to be lined up and have all-pro receivers in multiple spots. They're not going to have the best offensive line right out the gate, obviously. I think Dameon Pierce is a great running back, but in terms of overall running back, tight end positions, I don't think they're at the level of a lot of other NFL franchises. So that's why Bryce Young is absolutely perfect, because he knows how to distribute and manage and handle those situations, because he handled that at Alabama with lesser talent. C.J. Stroud is good out of Ohio State, but he always had like 5 number 1 draft picks at wide receiver throughout his entire tenure. I think he would be a good settling prize for Houston, but he's a guy I think who would struggle probably earlier in his career because he would not be used to having inferior talent, which Houston, obviously being one of the bottom rosters in the NFL, does with a lot of the top teams in the NFL. C.J. Stroud's been a front runner basically his entire career at Ohio State. I think he still was going to be good in the NFL. I just don't think it's the best fit. Bryce Young is the perfect fit for Houston. And so the fact that Anthony Richardson here is rumored to go number 1 overall, someone's going to trade up and open the door to make sure that Bryce Young does come to Houston. I tell you what, Texans fans, you could not get better news ahead of the draft. This is exactly what you wanted to hear. This is just a perfect situation, both for Bryce Young and for the Houston organization.